Hey friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
This episode is presented by Bakken Backers. After years of block permits and stifling regulations from Joe Biden, President Trump is unlocking America's energy potential.
We have more liquid gold under our feet than any nation on earth.
With executive orders for drilling and pipeline investments, just as he did in 2017 for the Dakota Access Pipeline.
And now I fully authorize the most talented team ever assembled to go and get it.
This is the moment to secure North Dakota's future, to stop radical outsiders who threaten our state's energy industries, and to grow our energy production, communities, and economy.
It's called Drill, Baby, Drill.
Support the Bakken and learn more at backthebakken.org.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. Busy legislative session still going on, and one of the things we've been talking about a lot this session is criminal justice reform. And believe it or not all the criminal justice reform that's taking place or that's on the table in Bismarck is Attorney General Drew Wrigley's bill. I have a column up about that. We're not going to talk about our guest. Talk to our guest about that. That's a separate proposal. But it's a series of bills, and I'm not sure it's gotten the attention it should because, again, I don't know how many times we see really consequential policy just kind of fly under the radar. And then it gets implemented and it works really well and it's a success story. And kind of nobody really knows it happened. I shouldn't say that. I think people notice the impact. People notice the change. I don't think they really understand like how it happened. And part of it does frustrate me because a lot of what we talk about in politics are the stupid things that they're doing, or the things that don't work, or the failures, or the fraud, or the abuse. Those are the things that get a lot of attention. We don't focus a lot of the attention on, gosh, we're making really good progress on some really good reform. And there's a slate of bills. It's backed by Governor Kelly Armstrong's administration. Lieutenant Governor Strinden is obviously a big supporter as well. It's House Bill 1425 is the first of them. It's related to why? And now I just completely lost. Diversion programs. I'm sorry. I completely lost. I thought I was going to be able to click to my notes fast enough to catch up to my mouth, but it's diversion programs. House Bill 1417 is related to parole and probation violations. House Bill 1549 is related to housing and things like that. They're good bills. And here to talk with us about them is Jonathan Holth, who has been, I don't want to say elevated. You were part of the Governor Burgum's administration, but you're in the cabinet now for Governor Armstrong. And you've got a position of, and again, I hate all these buzz terms. What's your title? With
you guys, you guys butchered it on the lead-in last week. So if you want, so my title is Commissioner of Recovery and Reentry.
Okay. You're lucky we're pronouncing your name right. And
yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah, Johnny Holt.
I'll take it. I'll take it. I knew I'd have the opportunity to say it today, so I didn't call or text you guys after I heard it last week.
So tell us a little bit about these bills. What are we trying to accomplish?
Yeah. So, I'll just start, with you talking about my position. The governor, when he was elected, reentry and behavioral health are priorities of his, and he said that in his State of the State address which is when he announced my position. And part of that is just working across the state to see what opportunities we have. So as you mentioned, there's a slate of 3 bills, House Bill 1425, 1417, and 1549, that really are the results of 2 years of work. In the last legislative session, there was a resolution that came through saying, hey, we've got some issues here that we need to study. And over the course of the interim, a diverse group of stakeholders, 15 stakeholders on a working group chaired by then Representative Strinden, now Lieutenant Governor Strinden, really looked at what issues we have within our system and ways that we could help. If you look at the numbers, I mean, just in terms of our prison population in the state, when the U.S. prison population declined between 2011 and 2021 by about 25%, ours in the state increased by 18%. And when you really look closely at that and break down sort of why that happened, the bulk, I would say, of those admissions, the increase in admissions is technical violations from people that are on probation, or clear instances where someone is struggling with substance use disorder and may have could have had some help to alleviate that. So the three slate of bills are a result of that group studying for over the course of a year all the different entry points into the criminal justice system, and there are a lot of them. They came up with 26 recommendations and sort of put those into 5 buckets, and then those buckets got developed into bills. So 1425 sort of looks at the front end. Rob, you mentioned, talks about a pilot program for 3 different counties to look at diversion. It also talks about deflection, so ways that our law enforcement can get involved before someone even enters the criminal justice system.
Define those real quick: diversion and deflection for people who aren't familiar.
So deflection, think about deflection as, a law enforcement official comes across somebody who might be having a mental health episode, for example, and, someone may be trespassed and they hadn't taken their medications. The officer, which, by the way, our law enforcement officials use this discretion every day, but this would sort of codify what that deflection process is. It allows our law enforcement officers to say, instead of taking someone to jail when that happens, they can assess the situation and bring them to a treatment center to get evaluated, or get them to a place where they can get the help that they need. So deflection, would be before someone even enters the justice system at all. There's no charges, anything like that. Diversion is, when someone is in the system, so they may have been charged or may have been arrested, and it gives the prosecution the ability to do essentially the same thing, to say, hey, this person really needs services, right? So rather than continue on this path of bringing them through all the stages of the criminal justice system, let's identify what this person's needs are, and get them the help that they need. So that's kind of diversion and deflection, the definitions of those. Go ahead, Chad.
Oh, no, you go ahead. Keep talking about the 2 other bills.
Yeah. So 1425 looks at sort of the front end, like we were talking about. 1417 really looks at, as you mentioned, Rob, probation and parole, and when someone has been in the criminal justice system, are there ways that we can look closely at making sure that they're set up for success? So it looks at technical violations. It looks at sort of tiered looks at those technical violations and how that might adversely affect someone. Again, when we're looking at the rising prison population in North Dakota and the data over the past few years, a large number of people incarcerated are there because of technical violations. So looking closely at that, and also looking at fees, that's a big part of this. As this group looked at the data, it looked at the $55 a month supervision fee that someone pays when they're on probation. First of all, does that set someone up for failure if people are struggling to have employment already, and they can't come up with that money? Secondly, are we really gaining anything from that? If you look at what the state was actually able to collect from those fees versus what they weren't able to collect, versus the time that they actually spent trying to collect those fees, it's really a wash. I mean, if you look at the fees that weren't collected, but then you look at the time spent trying to collect them, it's really not worth it. There's no gain that we're getting from those. So really looking at those fees, and then it also includes just the ability for us to continue to study fees across the board in our system to see what's beneficial and what's not. So that's really looking at the middle one. And then 1549 is looking at the back end. So as someone is preparing to leave incarceration, enter back into society, are they set up for success? So Rob, you mentioned housing. So, this would provide for a task force to really look at housing. I can tell you guys, since I've taken this job, I've been meeting with people that are in this, that work in this space across the state, whether it's state's attorneys, judges, treatment providers. Every single meeting that I've had, housing has come up as a barrier for people that are trying to get back on their feet. So it looks at that. Simple things like making sure that we are collaborating across agencies to make sure that when someone leaves incarceration, that they have a state-issued ID so that they can get housing and employment, that they have proper medical care before they leave jail or prison, to make sure that they're set up for success as they leave. So it's really the three of them together are a comprehensive look at sort of the front end, the middle, and the back end, and are the result of really studying this for over a year and a half to try to alleviate our prison population, which we know is growing, which we know costs money, but also to make sure that people are set up for success, because we know that 95% of people in jail and prison are going to be returning to society to become our neighbors again.
So Jonathan, in your previous role in the Burgum administration was, I believe, I'm going to screw up a title, but Director of Recovery Reinvented.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about how addiction and recovery fits into all of this stuff? I mean, I talked to a police officer the other day who said, and I don't know if this is true, but 80 to 85% of the stuff he deals with are alcohol or drugs are somehow involved. So where does recovery fit into all of this if we're going to make sure that people can be part of society and be, citizens like we want them to be?
Yeah, it's a good question, Chad, and it's the simple answer is it's a massive part of it, and the two are really intertwined. I've done ride-alongs with the police department in my hometown. The last one I did was the 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. shift, and I will tell you that every single call that we were on, not 80% of them, every single one of them involved drugs and alcohol. If you look at the data that was collected during this work group's work, 21% of North Dakotans would qualify for substance use disorder, and which is higher than the national average, right? So they're intertwined, which I think Governor Armstrong, to his credit, when he created this position, my position, and appointed me to it. It's why it's recovery and reentry, knowing that the two are completely intertwined. But again, when we talk about a rising prison population and we look at why that is, a large percentage of that is because of drug and alcohol problems that people have, that if we provided more opportunities for them to address that, then we're solving a lot of problems in the state.
It seems you've mentioned the rising prison population a few times, and I think that might come as a surprise to some people, because the narrative is that North Dakota is soft on crime. And so the idea of putting so many people, that our prison population has been rising so quickly, I think is maybe surprising. What about the people who would say that we're already too soft on crime, and doing some of this stuff is just going to make crime rates worse? Like we're not being as tough with them as we should be. Therefore, they're going to go back out into society and they're going to reoffend.
Yeah, I think first of all, we need to separate when we're talking about violent crimes versus what, the people that we're ultimately, looking at with these three bills, right? I mean, these three bills we're not talking about violent criminals with these three. So I think that there needs to be a delineation between those two. I would also say this. I mean, if we look at recidivism rates and we look at reoffending and higher crime rates, I would argue that a lot of time that is because we haven't set those people up for success when they're getting ready to re-enter society in the first place. So, there's, and I say this, this work group was assisted by the Crime and Justice Institute, which is a nonpartisan group that has done this across the country. These are, what we're talking about in these bills are best practices that have worked well in other parts of the country here. We're not coming up with something completely new. Now it's obviously tailored to North Dakota's population, but we have plenty of data that shows when we help people and ultimately keep them out of the system, the longer that they're in the system, and if they reoffend once and twice, the harder it is for them to get out of the system. So, so I think these things and these bills, these are small investments that can make a world of difference in what we're trying to accomplish in North Dakota.
Jonathan, when you were with Recovery Reinvented, you and I had several conversations about, that job was about sort of raising the profile and making people aware of addiction, those kind of things, and less so on the policy side of things. Now, here you are, 3 months into your job, during a legislative session, you're jumping right into policy and trying to solve some really big problems in a weird political environment, quite frankly, where people aren't necessarily seeing eye to eye. What are you learning? What are you surprised by? What are you liking about the job and trying to fix these complex issues?
Yeah, I think, I give a lot of credit to the Governor Burgum and First Lady Burgum for changing the conversation around substance use disorder and addiction in the state. And I think that frankly had to be done before we can tackle some of these issues. So, when meeting with Governor Armstrong, he said, like, let's stand on the shoulders of giants here and take this to the next level. Right. And that's what we really want to do. So what am I learning? I'm learning that, first of all, I really like it. I really like being involved on the policy level. It's been enjoyable. It's fascinating. I've also learned that we have a lot of really good people doing really good work in the state that want to do more good work. I've seen that every day. We have a lot more myth busting left to do, right? I mean, there's still a lot of misunderstanding around these topics. And I'm not talking about the legislature. I'm talking about in our general population around the state. So that needs to continue. But I think we are in a unique position in North Dakota because we've changed the conversation here about it to really make some differences in the coming years, to really to bolster services. We do services really, really effectively in this state. So I think we're really uniquely positioned to flip some of that data that was alarming coming out of that last interim.
I agree. And this does seem like the logical next step, right? I mean, step one is identifying that there's a problem. Step two is let's do some stuff about it. Not that we weren't doing things previously, but let's be intentional about this. You said myth busting. What are some of the myths that the public still has that need to be busted?
I think, you touched on it a little bit earlier, Rob, when when we're talking about, I think one of the things when we talk about crime, we put everybody in the same bucket, right? And I think being really clear and intentional about how we're addressing different people that have different needs is one thing. So, somebody that's convicted of aggravated assault is not does not have the same set of issues that someone who is suffering from substance use disorder that, like I mentioned earlier, might have not taken their medication and stumbled into, someone's backyard when they shouldn't have. So I think looking really clearly at the different levels of offenses is really, really important, and not assuming that everybody who enters the system is the same is really, really important. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I want to go ahead and finish.
Yeah. I also just think, when we did a lot of work in the Burgum administration on stigma and just how people talk about this. And, as we take the next level and develop this into policy, we also can't forget of the importance of continuing that stigma work, right? So lifting voices up that can tell powerful stories about how they've overcome, about how this impacts families, because we still have a long way to go. I mean, and I'm a person in recovery. I still see that every day, right? It's still very uncomfortable for some people to talk about. There's still, a lot of people that, too many people that believe that this is 100% a choice and it's not a disorder that's been defined by the CDC, so I think continuing to focus on that. We've seen how it changes how people look at this and how they treat it when they understand that it's a disease.
Walk me through how we draw some of the lines between the types. I mean, some of it's clear cut, right? Like if it's just somebody who was busted for possession because they have an addiction problem, that's pretty clear cut. or maybe somebody who's having a mental health episode and they trespass. That's pretty clear cut. But what about
Yeah.
somebody who does like some significant property damage
Yeah.
because driving drunk or they did something stupid while they were high, or somebody who hurts somebody else? I think we could argue there is a difference because the intent is maybe not there. Uh,
Sure.
but there's still property damage. Somebody was
Yeah.
so it's got to be hard to draw some of those lines. And I'm saying this completely agreeing. Like I want to draw the lines and I want to, but it gets pretty gray in some of these areas.
It does. It does. And I think that, so all three of these bills, passed the House and are now on the Senate side, working their way through, Senate Judiciary. We had a hearing the other day, and I know they're doing committee work on it even today as we speak. And I think that, there will be some amendments, I'm sure. But I think to your point, that will probably be addressed in some final versions of these bills, because I think it's important to note that the criminal justice system in the state of North Dakota is about accountability and holding people accountable. These bills don't change that. There's nothing in these bills that say we should hold people less accountable. And again, like I mentioned too, they're not meant for violent criminals. We still we're not talking about that group of people. I do think, again, though, that, to your point, Rob, law enforcement officials and prosecutors and judges are people that can make those decisions and can see that. And we do need to hold people accountable. And this is still, at the end of the day, these three bills are about public safety. They're about health and well-being, and we want that too. So that's important to us. And I think, but I also think why this is we're talking about in 1425 specifically with diversion and deflection, we're talking about a pilot program, that we'll try this out in 3 counties, and we'll report back to legislative management on what worked and what didn't, and we'll probably adjust in the next legislative session. So I think we're learning, and that will come out of this too.
So, Jonathan, it feels like this session is very much, sort of a black and white. Either you want to lock everybody up or else you're soft on crime. And I think your answer just there was very, very clear that there's still accountability here. What I know about your past career is you have the ability to get along with folks, to bring people together. Do you think once we get to May 1st, I mean, your job's probably just starting on May 1st, right? I mean, to implement all this kind of stuff. Do you think we have the ability, sort of as a state legislature, as elected officials, as prosecutors, as cops, as citizens, to sort of come together after this session and figure out what this looks like moving forward? Because everybody involved in this wants to have safe communities. Everybody involved in this doesn't want to spend endless amount of tax dollars locking people up, right? I mean, I think we all have shared interests in this, but how do we get to that point? So, I mean, as you're thinking long term, do you see a path where everybody can sort of come together, get on the same page, and move forward?
Well, everybody, I don't know about everybody, but
You set the bar high, Chad.
That's
yeah.
fair. That's
Jonathan,
super
do you
fair.
think you could get everybody to agree
Yeah.
with you?
right. That's
In this
yeah.
political environment, 100% of people to all agree on
Right.
a policy, Jonathan. Why not?
I mean, the short answer to your question, Chad, though, is I do. I do believe that, that there is a way to do that. And I do believe that consensus can be built. And that's done a number of different ways. First of all, it's done by including everybody in the discussion, right? And I talked about the diverse group of stakeholders that developed these bills. Not included in that 15 was, a series of 40 different agencies that they interviewed about these in the meantime too, right? And that also includes being willing to have conversations with people that you completely disagree with on this topic and trying to find common ground. So I do believe in that. I can tell you I'm committed to that. I believe the governor's office is committed to that. So that will be the plan and the goal moving forward on May 1.
What is
So
your
I'm going to jump in again here. So Kelly, the governor's made this a priority. Why? Why has Kelly made this a priority?
I think because Kelly understands the things that this group found in their work, and that's we have a rising prison population. We have to do something about that unless we want to keep building more prisons at really expensive rates over the next few years. I also think because of Kelly's background, he understands substance use disorder and mental health challenges. He talked about his grandma and the State of the State address, right?
Grandma Mert.
Grandma Mert. Yep. But he also, in his profession, his clients, when he was a criminal defense attorney, were the people that we're talking about here, that needed opportunities to better themselves. And so I think he has a comprehensive understanding of what these bills, if passed, can do for alleviating those issues.
Jonathan, what does your job look like? And I'm assuming these bills are going to pass. I'm looking back at the log on the legislative website, and I mean they all passed the House by wide margins. Obviously,
yeah.
That's no guarantee of success in the Senate.
I'm gonna say in this legislature, run through the finish.
1417 got a due pass out of judiciary this morning. The other two haven't been heard yet. So yeah.
Okay. What I'm saying is the prognosis looks pretty good.
Yeah.
But so assuming you're going to have these three bills, what is your job starting May 1st? I mean, what does your job look like from then on to get this stuff implemented?
Sure. Kelly described my role when he appointed me as really wanting to operationalize the relationship between the state, local governments, and providers that are working in this space. So, I'll sort of live in between and work with DOCR, DHHS, the governor's office, and then private providers from across the state. So, you heard me mention earlier, I've been taking a lot of meetings with state's attorneys and judges from across the state to make sure that at the county and local levels, that they're also getting the support from the state that they need, and that as people transition between state and county, that they're not falling through the cracks. So, job number one for me has been working on policy, helping the things that we're doing in the legislative session right now. And then job number two for me, I've been on a bit of a listening tour so far that will continue a little bit on May 1st. But is really just looking for more of these opportunities. Are there other things that we're not seeing from a policy perspective, from a support perspective, that we can help from even just from an agency perspective, not legislatively too. So
what about from a workforce perspective? Because that's one thing that I hear, for instance, in the state hospital debate, we talk about, there was a debate at one point about, should we be so focused on building sort of a singular facility in Jamestown versus going to more regional facilities around the state. And one of the things that came up, I had a series of articles about the struggles some of our judges are having in just getting people into treatment to get them competent so that they can go through the criminal proceedings. Because obviously somebody who is so compromised either because of mental health or substance abuse that they can't participate in their own defense, they can't be put on trial. So that's a difficult thing. But it came up in that context was that even if we build these facilities, who are we going to get to work in them? Because North Dakota's our available workforce is practically zero. So in addition to all the other things, Jonathan, that are on your plate, North Dakota's long-standing workforce shortage has got to be a complicating factor here.
I would say no matter who you were talking to in which industry, they would say that yes, it is. It's, workforce is an issue in the state. I will say though that we are taking steps to address that. I also serve on the opioid settlement advisory committee, and that advises how we're using our opioid settlement dollars that are coming into the state. Our last go around, we had, grants that were given that directly impacted workforce. And we saw the benefits of that to get more licensed addiction counselors trained. The numbers actually spiked in terms of the number of licensed addiction counselors in the state that are going through training. So we are doing that. It's interesting you bring up workforce though, because another piece of workforce that could use our help and that are people that are reentering society from the criminal justice system. If you heard my testimony during these bills at Senate Judiciary, I gave examples, being a small business owner myself of having to drive people that just got out of jail to the driver's license office to get them a state ID just so I could legally start their employment journey with me.
I've done that.
Yeah.
I managed a retail store in Minot for a while, and I would give, it was entry level type jobs, and we were hiring people And I was giving people, I was so it was at the height of the oil boom too in Minot. And I was driving people to appointments so that they could get what they needed so that eventually I could have somebody who would show up for work.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're ultimately talking about thousands of people in the state here that have a better chance of being gainfully employed and staying successfully employed. If 1549 passes and we can, put it into law. So I think that's an important part of the workforce discussion as well.
I think it really is. Jonathan, thank you so much for your time and coming on and telling us about it. Once again, the bill numbers are 1549, 1417, and 1425. They're all sponsored by State Representative Larry Clemeen out of Bismarck. Bills to watch. This is an important thing to watch. And again, I think it's something that flies under our radar. And what I always like to say when we talk about these criminal justice issues is that most of us aren't going to experience the criminal justice system from the inside. Most of us may not even have a family member who does, but a lot of people do. And you don't know how important this stuff is until you have a cousin or a daughter or a spouse or somebody you love, somebody you're close to go through this. And you don't understand how important it is, I think, to put flexibility, and really empower the people who are acting in good faith, or judges or prosecutors, defense attorneys, everybody else. Give them the tools, give them the flexibility, give them the options to really find the right path through this and to ultimately get somebody back to where they can, just live a life and have a job and have a family and friends and be prosperous. That's what we want.
And what you just said applies to substance use disorder too, not just criminal justice system. You could copy and paste that right into that statement and it's the same effect, Rob.
Or a lot of overlap.
Right. Right.
Jonathan, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jonathan. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, guys.
This episode is presented by Bakken Backers. After years of block permits and stifling regulations from Joe Biden, President Trump is unlocking America's energy potential.
We have more liquid gold under our feet than any nation on earth.
With executive orders for drilling and pipeline investments, just as he did in 2017 for the Dakota Access Pipeline.
And now I fully authorize the most talented team ever assembled to go and get it.
This is the moment to secure North Dakota's future, to stop radical outsiders who threaten our state's energy industries, and to grow our energy production, communities, and economy.
It's called Drill, Baby, Drill.
Support the Bakken and learn more at backthebakken.org.
Welcome back. Really interesting interview with Jonathan Holth, and that is a policy area. Again, it just pays dividends, Chad. When we put the effort in to really, I don't know what the right word, tailor the addiction, that whole process, whether it's criminal justice, whether it's going through, the treatment and therapy and everything else. The more that we can tailor that to the individual person and allow different options for different situations, I think the better off we are.
And it's the fiscally responsible way to handle these things. I mean, there's folks up at the Capitol who say, throw the book at everybody, lock them up. It's a very expensive and inhumane way to handle criminal justice.
The point he was making about fees, right? And I don't think people understand that. Like, you get out and you got to pay fees for everything. Like the court mandates that you got to take a counseling session. You got to pay for the counseling session. You're on probation. You got to pay a fee for your probation. And the amount of money that we invest just chasing those fees is more than we collect from the fees in the first. We're not doing anything. And what we're doing is we're making it harder for the people that we want to become productive citizens. We're making it harder for them to become productive citizens.
Well, when he was talking about chasing those fees, I couldn't help but think about the conversations we've had about lunch debt, right? And how much money that districts used to spend chasing down bad debt, and they'd spend $2 to get 50 cents. And that's sort of what I was thinking as Jonathan was talking about that. But
a little silly. We're going to switch gears. Senate Bill 2307. This is Senator Keith Boehm's bill. Senator Boehm is a Republican from District 33. His bill is aimed at our state's libraries. He has said that it's not an attack on our state's librarians and educators. I disagree with him. And it's a bill that the part of it that always, we've talked about this so much, but the part that blows my mind every time we talk about it is one of the statutes that it amends is the statute that governs porn magazines in gas stations, right? I mean, there's a bill there that says you can't have Hustler or something just sitting out in the open with the graphic cover for anybody to walk in the store to see, including children. So we passed a law, and it's not an unreasonable law, that that's got to be in shrink wrap. It's got to be behind a counter or something, so that a kid can't just be paging through the porn magazine. But what it does is it adds libraries and schools to that part of the statute, so that we're going to treat the content in libraries and schools as if they were porn magazines, which just blows my mind. And somebody who's ever been in a public library in the state of North Dakota knows we don't have porn on the shelves. Anyway, not long ago, there was a read-in where it was folks reading outside of their libraries. Chad, you participated.
I did.
I would have participated, but we had things come up that day. It was not a great Saturday. But it was a great event. The person who organized that event is Randy Monley. She is the co-chair of North Dakota Right to Read. She's also a Minot area librarian. Randy, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Senate Bill 2307 got a due pass out of the House Judiciary Committee. It was a 12-1 due pass recommendation. It now goes on to appropriations because there's a fiscal note tied to this thing, as well there should be. Because again, a lot of times our libraries, particularly rural libraries, are just big rooms. And so the idea that we're going to have to go curate the sections and go through and find books that have content that's not suitable for children and lock them away from children is going to require some construction in a lot of parts of the state. That's going to cost money. The fiscal note I'm looking at is basically $2 million through the 720.
But that's not even for like remodeling anything. The 2 million is only for databases and having age verification. And it does not cover the two most popular databases in North Dakota, Libby and Hoopla. So 2 million sounds bad, but it will honestly be more.
That 2 million is for the Odin system.
Yes.
Which and remind me what that is. I should know this, but
no, it's very random. Odin is something that the state library utilizes to let other libraries use the databases. So like EBSCO, academic journals, those sorts of databases. Also, like Nat Kids Geo or Nat Geo Kids, those sorts of databases, which are academic. So age verification for those.
So, Randy, thanks for being on. Thanks for all the work you're doing with Right to Read. And I feel terrible for librarians having to fight for themselves and fight for libraries like this. A lot of people talk about this bill being a book ban, and I don't describe it like that. I describe it as the arrest librarians bill because I think it does feel like an attack on librarians and educators who some in the legislature don't think would care about children or grooming or other things. So can you talk to me about how librarians are feeling? I mean, this feels like the second session in a row where librarians are having to justify their existence and the purpose of public libraries and school libraries, all those kind of things. Rob and I have talked about this pretty much every week since the beginning of the session, how much we appreciate libraries, but how are folks feeling?
Librarians are sad and scared and tired of fighting legislation like this, and also really not feeling seen or heard. Last session, there was different bills, and we fought those, and we didn't really win. And they were like, listen, we know you can mobilize librarians. So that's why I started Right to Read ND, because it's not just librarians, it's everyday citizens who feel that they have like the privilege to help their children find books in a library.
a lot of what we're hearing, and I've been reading, people forward me correspondence they're having with Senator Boehm or some of the other folks, but certainly at hearings and that, we see a lot of testimony from people saying, well, I went into my library and I found this book, and I think that this book is offensive, and I don't think kids should be able to see it. Therefore, we need this law. When you hear testimony like that, as a librarian who's working where the rubber meets the road on this issue, what's your response?
It's so hard, some of the books that they're touting out that are terrible for kids, one family may say, thank you so much for like having this book and letting me use it. And then another family comes in the next day and is like, this book isn't good. It needs to be put away. I know one of the books that has gotten a lot of heat. I personally had to use, we don't have it at our library. I borrowed it from a friend because my son is on the autism spectrum and I needed a sex education book that had pictures, that was able for him to understand. He's very black and white. Obviously, I'm a good mom. I'm not going to go on the internet and try to find something. I checked out about 20 books about sex education from my library, but none of those worked. So it's really hard when you're just trying to help people find the resources they need. Um, the other book, that Heartbreaker series, is interesting because that is the one that was in Sargent County schools, that they had a big kerfluffle and they talked about it at the Judiciary Committee. And that one's hard because it's for middle grade kids, middle school kids, high school kids. So in a K-12 library, what are you going to do? Are you going to have a separate space for just high school kids? I doubt many schools are going to do that. Or does everything in the library need to be at the level for a kindergartner? Um, it's just so hard with the vague language and the fact that anyone can say they don't like this book and it has to go in this space, or else they can go to the state's attorney. They don't even have to do a request for reconsideration process with the director, with the librarians, with the library board. They can just off-ramp that and say, this isn't suitable for my family, which means it's not suitable for anyone's families. That can slippery slope.
I don't know. Have you had any official comment or communication with our state's attorneys about how they feel about being looped into this? Because I've talked with a few, granted off the record, so I'm not in the, but they're not real enthusiastic about being looped in to this. I feel like they're like, well, we've got fentanyl and we've got drunk driving and we have all these other things that we're dealing with. I really don't want to police the library.
Right. I've tried to have conversations. I think they've been kind of asked not to speak with me, but I don't know. I think the hardest part about all of this is obscenity code has been in the Century Code for like decades. They reaffirmed it 2 sessions ago with HB, what was it, 1205? And then now they're just like, oh, libraries, porn everywhere. And honestly, I can't imagine any child is under their covers at night reading The Bluest Eye with their flashlight, trying to, have a good time. They have phones. Our computers already have CIPA, Children's Internet Protection Act, filters on them. I doubt the parents are putting filters on their kids' phones.
Randy, you mentioned the Sargent County example that's been used, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that did go through a process, right? And that it was determined that those books should stay in.
Yes.
We have processes in every school district and every public library in the state where folks can bring forward complaints, and it's not just one person making the determination up or down. It's usually a committee. Can you talk a little bit about, I'm assuming not every process is the exact same, but what sort of a process might look like at a public library in North Dakota?
Yeah. So we have a form. If anyone comes in and they say, I don't think this should be in the shelves, they fill it out with whatever book. They have to have read the book in its entirety. The form goes straight to our director, who then reads the book. Also looks for reviews, looks for information about the book, who the book is meant for, whether it's a child or a teen or an adult. And then usually also speaks with the librarian that's in charge of that section. They write a letter to the person stating what they think should be done, whether they think it should be moved to a different section, taken out completely, nothing at all. If the complainant gets does not like the director's decision, they can ask to be seen by the library board. Then the board, which is here 5 people, they read the book, they look at all the information, they make a choice, and then that's the complainant can come forward and speak at the board meeting to try to change their minds or talk about why they don't like the book.
I should do an open records request for the list of books that get challenged, just so I know what to read next. Because
Well, but on that subject, like how many books do get challenged? Like is it a handful of books? Do you have any sort of feel for that at all? I mean, we read about the Sargent County one. You don't hear about a lot of these things actually being challenged until it's a legislative session and Senator Boehm and others are bringing in horror stories.
Yeah, I think we had 2 books challenged maybe within the past year and a half. Prior to that, when the legislation was going on, we had a lot more, and people would come in and they'd be like, "Where are the bad books? Where's the list?" I'm like, "What list?"
Yeah.
Um,
You
they're
don't
def
maintain a list of bad books for when the kids walk
No.
in, you give them a list?
No, I do not. And a lot of that is just parents not looking through the book before they read it to their young children, because it's in the correct section if it's for like a 5th grader, but the children's library, at least here, is birth through 7th grade. So
one of the things I think we really struggle with this is people just have fundamentally different views on when and how children, young adults should be introduced to sex. We just went through it. There was a bill before, in fact, it got reconsidered in the House and it failed again, but it was related to surveys. And there were people who objected to kids in school even being asked about their sexual activity. Now, I look at that and I think, well, yeah, I mean, some of those questions are probing and provocative, perhaps. But that's how you get good data. I've never had a problem with my kids being asked, those questions. I hope they answer them honestly, so that when we're making public policy and things like that, we can do so on good data. But there's other people that just don't want. And I don't know how. I mean, the library belongs to all of us. I think that's fair to say.
yeah.
And then, so I understand how, some people like this. What I don't understand is to Chad's point, this only seems to be a problem during the legislative session. Like the rest of the time, when it's getting a lot of headlines because we're all talking about a bill or something, sure, maybe there's some more activity. But the rest of the time, it's like, I don't know that the people who are complaining the most about the libraries are spending a lot of time in the library. Because I don't see where the problem, I mean, when you're telling me that there have been at the Minot Public Library, which is in one of our largest communities in the state. And by the way, I should make it clear, Randy is not speaking for the Minot Public Library or the city of Minot. This is something she's doing on her own time. But you're saying 2, maybe 2 challenges
Maybe 2.
in the last year and a half?
Yeah.
Why is our existing process not good enough to handle that?
I think with Sargent County Schools, it was just that they didn't win.
They didn't get the result they wanted.
Yeah, and I mean that's life, right? You go into a legal process and you don't always win your case. The point of the reconsideration process is to weigh one person's opinion about a book against the entire community and who may need that book. And I wrote to legislators recently and I got, well, you saw what happened and 200 people signed that petition. Well, in that area right now, there's another petition going around because people who signed the petition were misled about what the petition said. And some of them were not even in the school district. So I believe they have 125 signatures on their counter petition right now, because they're really upset with being misrepresented.
Well, and so what now? So the House Judiciary gave an overwhelming do pass. It's now going to appropriations, $2 million at a minimum. How are you folks feeling about the ability to defeat this thing? I mean, I think that $2 million appropriation certainly helps defeat it at a time when we're cutting other budgets around the state, including those for K through 12 funding. So how are you feeling about things, and what can people do to help?
I'm feeling cautiously optimistic. I feel like we've had the turnout with testimony, with emails, and it's not doing anything. When you have 85% of your testimonies being in opposition and yet 12-1 do pass, what is that? It doesn't make sense to me. But I think the 2 million will help, and then it'll be on the floor. People can email their legislators. They can, we have a website, righttoreadnd.org. We have talking points, what the bill is talking about if you don't understand the fancy schmancy language, all that sort of thing.
Righttoreadnd.org. And I would recommend signing up for that, even though, we're getting close to the end, maybe on the debate over this in this legislative session. But the way things are going, I have a feeling that it's going to continue. I mean, we're going to see more of this. And I'm looking, by the way, I'm looking at the testimony registry on the legislative website for Senate Bill 2307. There's 377 entries. Now, granted, there's duplicates in there sometimes, but 85% was in opposition. This gave it a 12-1. A lot of this is being driven by a relatively small faction of the public. And I just think people need to understand that I don't think that this activism is reflective of the larger North Dakota electorate. I think most of them either don't care that much or they're not for this. And again, I think if people would go, the best argument I think you can make against this bill is to go visit your library.
Yes.
Go check out the books that are and by the way, your library is a fantastic place to visit anyway.
Thank you.
I check out tools from the library.
Yeah.
I check out books. I am probably one of your best customers for ebooks. I think it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. One of the best things. Hopefully my wife won't hear that.
I have a bone to pick with my local library. You ready for this?
No,
So
what?
we go to the library all the time. We love our library. But my son came home the other day with a backpack full of ghost hunting equipment. And so just periodically I'd hear like weird beeping noises throughout my house. And it's just like, what are you doing? Pick up a book, kid. But that goes to show all the different things that a public library can.
It's cool stuff. You can get Arduino kits. You can do computer programming. There's 3D printers. I'm sure your library is not dissimilar, wherever you're listening to this. You go in there, there's not a problem in our libraries. If you go in there, there's going to be some books on the shelves you don't like, but you know what? You live in a free society. That's the price of admission.
Hey, Rob, if you don't like those books, don't read those books.
Hey, by the way,
shocking.
If we're going to talk about ultimate parental responsibility, I go to the library with my kids. I pay attention to the kids. The books my kids read. My son and I have a book club. That's how nerdy we are. We read books together every day. That he picks out or I pick some out. It's a lot of fun. I pay attention to what he's reading. And if I see something that, you know what, buddy, maybe you're not ready for that one yet, I don't let him read it. And that's my choice as a parent. Anyway, righttoreadnd.org. That's the right URL.
That's it.
You need to go sign up for the list, stay engaged on this. It's an important issue. And unfortunately, I think it's going to keep coming up for the foreseeable future, but hopefully we can get this bill defeated. Randy, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
In North Dakota legislators, stop fighting with librarians. It's silly and it's dumb. Let them do their great jobs and do the great work. And good luck, Randy.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome back. And Chad, I will admit to some bias on the library bill thing. And part of it is I love books. I have a stack of Bret Easton Ellis books that I just got, used books that I buy. I'm building a library in my home. I love books. I absolutely love books. My parents let me read just about whatever I wanted to when I was a kid. I do the same thing with my kids. It's not going to hurt your kids. And I understand that your values aren't necessarily mine, But again, the library belongs to all of us. They're doing a pretty good job. They have processes in place. They have librarians there. They're not letting the kids just run hog wild in the library. It's fine. We can unclench. This is not a problem.
Yeah, this very afternoon, the House Education Committee is working on the bill that declares fundamental rights for parents. And you sort of alluded to this at the end of the interview with Randy. I mean, if we believe parents have the fundamental rights, then I think we can trust parents to handle this issue. And again, I think her saying a couple books have been challenged over the last 18 months. We're looking for a problem. Yeah, in my
which is the epicenter of
of all this. But come on, we're looking for a problem here. Let's just leave libraries and librarians alone and focus on the things that matter. I believe it was Rob Port who once said, just plow the damn streets. That's what we want from the elected officials. Yeah. Attacking librarians is not plowing the damn streets.
All right, we got some feedback on our...
Rob, I'm excited about this feedback because this is the first time I've never seen the feedback before we're talking about it.
Okay, so the first one is we have Tony, who left us a comment on Spotify. Tony said, Representative Fedorchak discussed balancing the budget through cutting government spending. Obviously, there is some waste in the federal budget, and that's what the national conversation has been focused on. But I wish we could focus on other solutions. The TCJA. What is TCJA? I don't know what that is.
Stumped.
Yeah, I don't know. So the TCJA reduced corporate tax from 35% to 21%. That must be like maybe the Trump tax cuts, maybe? I don't know. While since it says reduce the corp tax from 35% to 21%, while since then many corporations have seen profits rise as much as 50%. Largely, corporate tax cuts have not trickled down, and I think it could be easier to balance the budget if we taxed our highly profitable corporations. I think you and I have both agreed that we have $35 trillion in debt. We need both sides of the equation.
Right. You can't just talk about revenue side. You can't just talk about expenditure side. There has to be a balance here. And the fact is our tax rates, both nationally and in state, have gone down pretty substantially. But yeah, I think we need to look at the full equation.
I would really like to get back. I think if we talk about flattening taxes, I think that's a really good idea. Fewer exemptions, more focus. And I don't mind it being progressive to a point, but I think we need to get back to a point where everybody's got some skin in the game paying for their government. And we're keeping the broad tax base broad, but we got to bring in some new revenue. That's got to be part of it. I don't know that I want like punitive taxes on corporations because that hits us in some places. A lot of times those costs get passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices, less hiring, some other things. But I definitely think taxes have got to be part of it.
And I think you're going to be surprised to know I'm a bit of a tax the rich sort of guy. I think we need to figure out how to get rid of some of the loopholes on unearned income, those kind of things. I also think, and I think you mentioned it last week, I mean, raising up that cap on Social Security taxes and that more people should be paying into Social Security with the money they make over that current cap is something that we should be doing right now to also make Social Security a little bit more solvent.
We got a listener from Mayville texted, I appreciate your podcast, but was disappointed that Congresswoman Julie Fedorchak stated that a 6% occupancy rate for federal offices meant that people weren't doing their jobs. Working remotely exists. Why did neither of you point that out? I think that's a good point if the occupancy rate is a lot higher than 6%. But at 6% occupancy rate, I don't want to pay to have empty offices that we're heating and cooling and doing maintenance on and all the rest of it, electricity, that are just sitting there empty. If people are going to work from home and we can discern that that's a practical and efficient way of doing things, fine, but we still need to right size the office space. I guess I didn't respond to it because 6% is a really low number.
So I did think about what the texter is saying right here, because she did certainly insinuate that folks were not working if they were not in the office, and I don't think that's the case. I actually think if we're to a point of a 6% occupancy rate, then let's just let everybody work from home full time and close down that office to save money, right? I didn't like, meant or otherwise, that there's an insinuation that federal workers were not working because these offices are empty. But I also think some efficiency by I mean, if people are choosing to work from home or they're allowed to work from home, then we shouldn't pay for their office as well. That's just stupid. And so figuring why there's this low occupancy rate and then go from there.
I think, if we're being critical of work from home people, then I absolutely agree with you. And I'm trying to remember her comments. I'd need to go back and listen. I trust, if that's what I've been working at home for 15 years. I feel like I work pretty dang hard. And it works for some people. It doesn't work for other. I'm not here to tell any given business what's going to work right for them or not. What I'm saying is that the government, though, is a huge employer, federal government. And if we're going to let people work from home, then we need to pick a lane. Either we're going to let them work from home, in which case we need to adjust our office space situation, or we need to get them back in the office. But we got to pick one or the other.
I think you and I are in the same place there. I also think post-COVID that most employers are still working their way through how to handle this work from home scenario. I mean, employees want that flexibility. There's competition for employees. I mean, if the federal government all of a sudden goes 100% in, I think you're going to lose people. But again, I agree with you. If these buildings are empty, get them off the books.
So the other thing, we alluded to it a little bit when Jonathan was on talking about the, situation with criminal justice reform. And we alluded to it a little bit. We didn't really bring it up, but the absolute food fight that is happening over criminal justice reform. The House Judiciary Committee had a lengthy, hours-long hearing about it. The room was packed with people with wearing uniforms, state's attorneys, and everything else. The Attorney General, almost histrionic in his testimony in favor of this legislation, and it's all about just keeping people in jail longer. I mean, it's there was a and I think it was Robert Valley, who was an assistant state's attorney, Cass County. He used a term that I really liked. He called it a seductively simplistic solution, and I think that's right, because it sounds nice, like we can just solve our crime problem by doing this. And the thing is, it's not. You put people in jail longer, they're still going to recidivate when they get out. And in fact, I would argue maybe more likely to recidivate, because by keeping them in jail longer, we've taken them out of the world longer. We've institutionalized them longer. I think we've put them in a worse off place than they would have been if we could have maybe, used our common sense and moved them through a little bit quicker. But there was a hearing this week, and at the hearing, it really frustrated me, because we've heard a lot from our Attorney General talking about, people are lying and they're not telling the truth and everything. There is a detective, Christopher Huard, from the Wapaton Police Department, who stood in front. He was wearing his badge, and he's given this very somber, very serious-minded testimony. And certainly he's talking about a very ugly case, a bad situation. It involves a young girl, Bailey Jo Bernstein, who was struck and killed by a vehicle driven by Chad James Olson. Chad is in jail right now because allegedly, or not allegedly, he was convicted. He was driving that vehicle while drunk. So what happened is that the detective was standing in front of the committee, and one of the things he said is he said that he checked. I'm going to read the quote. He said, "Currently, as of this morning, when I was in my hotel room, I checked the resident log at DOCR. Chad Olson is not incarcerated. This is quite simply an injustice and a failure of current practices." Now, the problem is that person he was talking about, Chad James Olson, is incarcerated. I was able to verify that. The North Dakota, the Department of Corrections has an online resident lookup. You can punch in a name, you can find them, and he's at the Missouri River Correctional Center. Granted, that's a minimum security facility, but he is incarcerated. That is a prison, and he is in there, and he's not eligible for work release. He's not out and about. He is in jail. And it frustrated me for two reasons, Chad. First of all, I don't like it when cops wear their uniforms for political reasons. It bugs me. That is not why we give them those uniforms. And they do it all the time. They do it in Fargo when they want a pay raise, and they pack the room full of uniforms. And I think that's intimidation. I think if they wanted to show up outside of the uniforms and everybody wears the same color shirt, fine. whatever. They're citizens too. But that uniform was not given for you to use for your political situation and for your political opinions. And then the other part of it is this was not true, which means the detective was either sloppy or he knew the guy wasn't in jail or was in jail and he didn't tell the truth. Neither of which reflects well on a detective.
Well, yes to all of that. And again, when we're trying to figure out these very complicated policy things and you have politicians involved, and I think you said in your column that Drew Wrigley's a very talented politician, and he's also very good at, I'm going to say self-promotion, but I don't mean that like in a negative way, because politicians have to be self-promoters. And Drew's very good about that and very good about being in front of a camera, sort of portraying himself as a tough on crime guy. But you really do have this scenario of either you're for this bill, which means you hate the bad guy, or you're on the other side and love the bad guy. And I think the column you wrote and the police being in that room really poured gasoline on that conflict of what we're talking about here. And again, if you have to resort to either lies or sloppiness around somebody being in prison after this terrible event and potentially using this terrible event to move forward your policy, you don't have a very good argument. And so I don't know if it's unfortunate or callous or what that this police officer used that information incorrectly. But regardless, I think it's become political theater and a very, very serious policy matter. And I don't like it. And I also think the legislature's fallen for it, quite frankly. I'm guessing the House Judiciary is going to give a due pass to this bill, knowing who's on that committee, and then the fight's going to be on the floor.
Yeah. And I honestly don't know what'll happen on the floor. The House did kill a similar bill to this last session, but who knows? It's a different House now. So
yeah, but I'm guessing the governor is going to have his veto pen out unless something changes pretty dramatically with this bill.
I suspect that's true. It's unfortunate because, again, our conversation with Jonathan, the work we are doing is so important. And a lot of times the attorney general will say, oh, no, I don't want to, I don't want to get away from treatment. I think it's all good work. In fact, he was called in on the slate of bills that we talked about. He parachuted in to a committee meeting, a committee hearing where Travis Fink and I believe it was the state's attorney from Cass County, Kim Hegvik, were testifying, and he flew in and was accusing them of lying and everything else. It wasn't even his bill. It was these 3 reentry bills that Jonathan, and while he was there, he was very like Jonathan was there because obviously he testified on the bills and it's like, oh, Jonathan, but your work is great and everything else. But I don't think he actually believes that. I think if you go and listen to the testimony yesterday, he kept and Representative Bill Twite kept asking them to hold up, Wrigley's chart that shows crime rates. It was like, how well has the soft on crime approach worked? Well, when he's talking about soft on crime, he's talking about stuff like this reentry stuff. That's what he's talking about. They don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, and thinking about Drew sort of flying into that committee room, I had you and a few others that suggested I go back and watch that, and I did. But Jonathan was at the podium as all of a sudden Drew comes in with this huge chart and sort of disheveled and whatever, and sort of, sat in the front row. It was interesting political theater. But again, it wasn't his bill. I also, Drew's the top cop in the state of North Dakota. Crime rates are up. You're the top cop in North Dakota. I don't know how you can blame this on the Department of Corrections and others. I don't know. I don't know that the data makes him look particularly good, my opinion, if it truly, and I don't know what the data is, quite frankly, because it seems like everybody's got their own set of facts when it comes to this issue. But again, I go back to, we all want our communities to be safe, and we don't want to spend extra tax dollars locking people up. Let's figure out the best way to come to that conclusion.
And I just don't think throwing the book at everybody's the right way. And I mean, he talks about crime rates in North Dakota being up. Well, we just had a black swan event with the pandemic. Crime rates are up across the nation. It did some weird things to us, unfortunately. And I think we're still living with some of the social ramifications. But also, crime rates may be up. incarceration rates in North Dakota are also up. So if the idea that putting more people in jail is going to solve this problem, then why did crime rates go up at the same time incarceration rates went up? And that has been the one question that they cannot answer, which is show me where a truth in sentencing bill has reduced crime rates. They were asked that question. One of the state's attorneys that was testifying on Drew's side of the bill was asked that question, and he said, he brought up the state of Virginia. So, well, the state of Virginia saw a crime decline but if you look at it, the whole country saw a crime decline. Right. And states that have truth in sentencing laws and states that don't have truth in sentencing laws. A lot of times, these ups and downs don't have anything to do with it. So I don't think that you can say, the one certainty is truth in sentencing will cost us a hell of a lot more tax dollars.
And I also think the human element of all of this, I mean, there, but by the grace of God, we could have all been in these positions. I mean, making bad decisions with drinking or other things, right? And we have to remember, Jonathan did a good job of trying to make this point. Not all criminals are the same.
Not all alcohol.
Yeah. And so I think figuring out how we can do right by society, by treating people with respect. I understand if there's crimes that there's victims, and you mentioned property and those kind of things. Obviously, that's different. But, if somebody's having the book thrown at them because of a technicality regarding probation or not being able to pay the $55 a month fee or things like that, there's things that we can do right by these folks and make society better.
Yeah. What I don't appreciate, because the thing is, I understand that people disagree with the way you and I look at this issue, or the way Jonathan Holth looks at this issue, the way the governor looks at this issue. What I am tired of is having this debate in the context of you either agree with the attorney general's throw the book at him approach, or you love criminals. I'm tired of it.
Well, and I mean, when you had Drew on, when I was out and Aaron was guest hosting, I mean, Drew basically accused you of just wanting to let all the criminals out.
Well, yeah, just shut down all the prisons, which obviously is not what I support. He did apologize for that.
I'm glad he did, but that is sort of the rhetoric that's problematic here, right? That is getting us to this point. I'm glad he apologized, but it's not helpful.
He also keeps doing it. And it's just not.
It's almost like the apology doesn't mean that much if he keeps doing it to other people.
He hasn't done it again to me. I mean, maybe we'll call him today. He won't like so much, but I don't know what to do about it. I mean, I don't like the degree to which he is politicizing law enforcement. I think it's a dangerous thing to have those uniforms turn into a political totem. And I think his policy is fundamentally misguided. And the tension that he's creating between the corrections department and law enforcement and the judiciary and the prosecutors and the defense attorneys, we need them all working together. And we seem to be pushing them all further away from each other.
And finding Department of Corrections employees, I mean, is difficult enough. And then you have, the attorney general saying things that make those employees feel like they're failing at their job or they're terrible or whatever. It's just not good. Again, I think we can get somewhere where we have the same goals here. Taxes low, community safe. Let's do it, folks.
We can do it. All right, that's it. I appreciate everybody listening, as always. Coming up on Friday, we're going to have our... it wasn't going to be the full episode, but it turns out that during the legislative session, the governor is a little bit busy.
Yeah, Governor Armstrong told us that nothing would change, going from congressman to governor. Now he can only give us 30 minutes to talk about baseball. 30 minutes?
Well, we're probably lucky to get those 30 minutes.
We are.
We're going to have 30 minutes because opening day is on Thursday. So we're going to have 30 minutes on Friday.
Second opening day.
For some people, opening day was in Japan. Was it a week ago now?
Yeah, I'm still tired from it.
Still tired. I still don't know how you put up with all those West Coast games. I would not be able to handle that. Anyway, Governor Armstrong's going to be on Friday. We're going to talk baseball. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.
I believe it was Rob Port who once said, just plow the damn streets.